Hi guys, in Drawn from Artists today we're going to look at the work of John Piper. Now I do look at John Piper in several other videos, and he's a British artist and associated with Edward Borden and the other artists that I cover in my print videos. Now the thing about John Piper is it's quite often architectural. The work we're going to look at today is, and I've picked a facade that is face on to us, so we're looking at an elevation rather than a plan or a three-quarter view. We can see this sort of symmetrical facade, and the process we're going to look at is quite experimental, but we need to put in some order. So what I've done is on acetate I've done an overdrawing. I've taken the image and using a permanent pen I've drawn onto acetate. So I've got a permanent pen here, drawn onto acetate, and this is the overdrawing. I've separated that so you can really see it, because one of the things we do when we do Drawn from Artists is really look at the type of marks and style of the artist's work. Now John Piper uses a broken line. It's not a really clean line, and it's suitable for his subject matter. So if I draw a clean line here and I draw a weighted line, I'm altering the weight, and I draw a broken line. In the broken line I might have altered the weight as well, because you're lifting the pencil or pen on and off the paper, and it lends itself to this sort of architectural style. In Manchester, if I was drawing sort of back streets of the Northern Quarter, I'd probably go for a John Piper broken line as opposed to a nice clean line if I was drawing the new buildings down the bottom of Deansgate or the Beetham Tower. So you might alter the type of mark making you do in this context. Now, we're going to zoom in and have a look at the surface of this work. Now we're looking at a reproduction because we're in lockdown, so we have to obviously try and decipher what's going on here. Right, I can see some drawn marks. They look a little bit like an oil pastel. They could be a felt tip pen. John Piper was knocking around a while ago, so they're more likely to be oil pastel and paints. But let's look at the lines we've got here, those dip pen style broken lines. Something there looks a little bit like wax resist. Now you might wonder what's meant by wax resist. Now quite often we're doing this sort of work, I would suggest we could draw like little boxes, or you could print out and write some recipe notes alongside what you try. So here I've picked up, happens to be a free crayon, and I'm going to try some crayon in a box. I'm going to draw myself another box as well, because I might do something else in the box below. I'm going to put crayon. I might put blue crayon, but I've got some more crayon in this box here. So I've got crayon, yellow, turquoise, turquoise. So this is my little recipe. Now I'm going to add some wet materials over the top. So I've got beside me a little set of watercolour paints. And I've actually just got some colours on here. I've got a dirty brush. The colours are less relevant at this stage. I want to see what happens. So I've got a kind of dirty red brown colour, and I'm going to apply it over the top. Now, obviously I've done this before, so I know I'm going to get a wax resist. You can see where the paint is pooling on the surface. Just going to wash that brush a minute, and I'm going to take a felt tip pen. And my felt tip pen, I'm going to draw some lines over, and I can see what's happening. I'm beginning to get the resist already. Just going to get my brush again. The felt tip pen's quite nice. So what I can see with the felt tip pen is I can still see the drawn marks and the wax resist. That colour combination's maybe nicer than the one above, but both would lend themselves to the sort of thing I'm doing. So in here I might put plus watercolour, and here I've put felt pen and water. So this is the fun bit, this is the working out, this is trying out and getting to know your materials, and it's always really important that we get to know our materials when we're experimenting. So I suggest we do a little bit of this. We have this as an ongoing document or page in a sketchbook as we work. Now in another video I was talking yesterday about using corrector pens on water. So I've got my watercolour again, my same colour, because I'm being fairly quick with this. I'm going to just get a little bit of blue onto a different colour as well. So I've got some watercolour onto the surface here. Gonna make that a bit darker, and running at it with a bit of brown as well. So I've got the watercolour. I've got my corrector pen. I'm going to put some corrector pen onto the watercolour and see what happens. It is running around. I wonder what happens then if I draw onto it. I can move around the wet corrector pen. I do like the pencil actually on the wet paper. So on here, I've got a dirty tip on my pencil. I started with watercolour, corrector pen, and it's important it's on wet, and then I added pencil. And you'll kind of remember the process of doing it, but you'll be able to look back as a little recipe book to say, I'm going to have a bit of that in my development. Now, how do we get to the place we can start enjoying the materials? As ever, I'm working on a very small scale because we're doing the Drawn from Artists series, and it's essentially to help us during lockdown. So the first thing I'm going to do is just scale up the image and do a little drawing of it. So to scale, draw myself a little rectangle, and I can take a few measurements off it. So from the left hand margin to the apex of that point there, I'm going to look by eye. I'm going to just sketch it in. Now, you know, I've already traced this down onto a piece of acetate. You can see I've already done that, but that's not really why I've done that. I've done that just to show you that the overdrawing goes on top. So I'm going to take most of this stuff out of here. Because I've already drawn it once using that process, it's all very familiar to me. I'm just going to take a rough measurement of how far across that arch starts. And it's quite wide. Quite a wide arch, isn't it? A Romanesque rounded arch. I'll put a massive arch in there. If you're struggling to draw these things and you want to use some drawing tools, that is absolutely cool. You know, I'm fine with you doing things like that. Whilst being a purist has some measure to get you in the process of being able to make your artwork, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You could use the oil pastel trace base technique for this. That would work really well, and it'd just be a way to get you going and get past this first stage of the drawing if you're a little bit nervous about it. So I'm sketching in most of it just so I'll know later when I come to draw it back in. There's the columns at that end, that window. I'm just doodling it in. It's all there. So I'll pop back in a minute when I've drawn a little bit more of the image in. So I've largely got the image down, and I want to create some of these interesting marks. And I'm going to reach over and I'm going to pick up my collection of crayons. They're obviously my children's crayons. I don't have a green, even though there's quite a lot of green in this image, so I might have to do a bit of layering. So I'm going to follow roughly what's going on. There's a little bit of red up there, some red lines here, some red lines there. But you can obviously freestyle. I will often advise that you follow the tonal reference material over the colour. So as long as it's dark where it's dark and light where it's light, it tonally will make some kind of sense. So I'm looking for anywhere where it's a bit red. A bit red in the background, a bit red in the background over here. And then I'm going in for some sort of greeny colours. Now remember, I don't have green, so I'm going to just whack some of this turquoisey colour down. Now, if later I want to work on it with a fine liner, I've got to remember that I can't have too much of this because we've seen the felt tip does not want to go on top of the crayon. So see, I'm generating a kind of green colour because I'm putting that yellow in, but I also need to have some yellow anyway. Anywhere else I need a bit of yellow? Maybe over here. If the things are slightly out of position, I'm less worried about that. This is quite experimental and it's about enjoying material, so let's just go with it. So there we've got those materials down. Now you could say, can I use pencil crayons? Can I use other things on it? Of course you can. I've got a pencil crayon here and I want some blue. Are those the kind of marks I want into it? I don't really know. Oil pastel would be super for this. It would definitely work well. My oil pastels are downstairs and my enthusiasm is upstairs, and I can't be bothered to go and get them. in another study I might do. I've got maybe more than I'd want there. I've got some nice pencil crayons here. I've got some fancy ones. So I might try some different colours into them. But I don't want to be sort of seduced for too long by the pencil crayons. I want to get on with some painting and moving some wet materials around. So I have just a school set of pencil crayons, watercolours rather. I've got my little on my desk water pot, which is a lid. And the kind of colours I want to put down are quite dark in the background, but I don't want this to be really flat. So I'm not going to put down a really heavy black. So I'm taking this blue. I've got my French ultramarine. I've got this more Prussian blue. It's kind of more greeny. I'm going to try a little bit of that as a dark tone into here. And I'm getting quite nice effects straight away. See that kind of way it's separating. And what I'd like you to do is work into sections. So at the moment I'm just working into the background. It's an odd way to work because the background and the foreground are connected here. So I'm probably should say the positive object being the building or the negative space being the background. So I've been mixing my colour there, and I've got the dirty red off my palette up here. I didn't wash my palette from the other day. I've kind of gone over the edge a little bit of my image, but I don't mind that too much. I want to mix the colours so I'm getting range. Now, when we do the colour wheel, we're quite specific really about how to use your brush. Here I'm kind of throwing things down but keeping quite a nice profile of the building. Contaminating my colours. If you're sharing colours, obviously you're not in a lockdown world, but if you are sharing colours, it's annoying when somebody else comes and contaminates them, so think on. Oh, that purple colour's quite nice. It's not really what's there, but let's go with it. So you see how I've worked into the building. So I've worked, around the building, the negative space. I'm now going to work into the building. And you could say there's some nice green colours. Let's just use some of this green. This green is going to look a little bit artificial. So I'm going to mix it, take some of the brightness away with colours that are on my palette. Now these colours are a little bit dirtier, a bit washier. And I'm just popping them down. You might say, well, there's not green in that area. That's cool. If you're enjoying it, you like that colour more than the colour that's there, you could go for it. Now, some of it is quite white. I actually am working a piece of card that's cream, so I've lost the brightness of the paper already by my choice of material. And I've only used this cream because I happen to have it to hand. It's actually in the top of my bin by my desk. And some sort of more pinky colours down this end. I'm going down this dirty part of my palette again. Maybe they're a bit too dirty. If they're a bit dark, we can just get some water on it and wash them down a bit. So what I need to do next is let that dry. I'll be back in a minute. So we're back, and what I'm going to do now is just pop on my earlier overdrawing, because this is obviously a separate drawing and slightly different scale, but you can see what happens when the drawing comes back on top of it. If we look back to the original image, there's darker sections, and I could paint these in or I could start drawing them in, and it depends on your control and what you feel is appropriate. So I might start trying to draw them in with a felt tip. Most of us feel like we've got more control with a felt tip than we do with maybe some paintbrushes. But see how I'm using that broken line that I talked about before, and these darker sections, and then it's quite dark down this side of the column. Got that arch there, it's dark inside. I might do a little bit of fast forward on this for you and come back to you in a minute. So at the back end of that, I started to use a pen that's actually running out a little bit, but that's adding a different type of mark, and it's obviously something we can use. Now with this, we can obviously wet it and we can move some of that around and soften it up if it's something you'd like to try. Remember, don't worry too much about it. If something goes wrong, we can always go back to the beginning and come back to this. I am being quite controlled though, as I'm drawing in with this. And I think there's colours that I'd like to reintroduce now. There's a bit pinkier down that side. If it's all running together too much, you can obviously let it dry. You might be tempted to use a paper towel or a bit of old toilet roll and dab it, but that can obviously move the marks around and change the surface quite a bit. So give it a try. You can always try it on one of your samples and then you can come back to it. If it's not quite right, you can obviously work back into it again. So in that case, I've worked into it with a slightly different colour. I'm just having to play around with it. If something doesn't look okay, you can always build onto it. So much pinkier down this end, so I'm going back into it with maybe some more reds. You could say, can we reintroduce some more of the crayon? I think you can. If you put it on a wet area, I don't know how well it'll take. It's taken reasonably well onto there, but I do think it's damaging the surface of the paper because it's a bit softer, obviously, where it's wet. The paper pulp's been lifted. Right, I'm going to let it dry naturally, I think, at this stage before I go into the overdrawing. Look, I mean, I'm saying I'm about to do that and then I'm getting carried away again. One last thing I thought I might just try is I've got a little bit of paint on the brush and I'm going to do a little flick. You see that quite controlled flick? I've gone a bit Jackson Pollock here, maybe more so than John Piper. I quite like this. Quite controlled flick. It's gone into the background and onto the object, the building, the positive and the negative. You could create a physical mask by putting paper over one section if you just wanted it in one area. But that's a fun thing to try and add some new textures and features. You can obviously try it with different colours as well. So it's almost dry and I've come back to it now. What we could do then is start reintroducing the overdrawing. So we did an underdrawing to position everything. Now remember, my overdrawing was a trace of this one, so it's not exactly in position. My drawing's slightly out, you can see that. But I'm not fussed for that. I'm just looking at it and how I'm going to reintroduce it. Remember, we want to incorporate those broken lines. Just grab my other piece of card. This kind of broken line or this weighted line here. You might see that I've also been doing some more sampling where I've been waiting for things to dry, so I've got a record of all the things I've done. That's great for sketchbook recording and to remind you what you've done. So here I'm going to now start the more careful drawing. And an overdrawing is something lots of artists do at the end, even in paint, where we start to define things and pull loose things together. So I'm just going to quietly sit and enjoy the overdrawing stage. A degree of making up might be going on, an invention. You can do it with a permanent pen as well. You don't have to do it with the water-based. You can also do it with a pencil. In this case, I've just got my standard pencil and it works quite nicely, especially on the wet, but it just doesn't stand out quite as much as the pen. So you might do a mixture of different things together and try out different types of marks. So as you know, I generally try and work with materials you have at home. I've got like a chunky red felt tip here that I'm just going to try and put some detail into there based on these little crossover lines. It's a bit too thick. A red biro might work into that as well. When I go on some of the wax, it's actually not working particularly well, but that's quite nice. And if it's too much, I can obviously take the water at it again and move it around. And whilst I generally, like I say, I try and work with materials you have at home, I am going to introduce you to a material that I think would be quite nice. See, I'm just deciding I want to darken off some of those bits in there. So paint pens, they are actually really great. And if you look at these little white lines, you can actually do this with a paintbrush. Need to get this pen started. Not used for a while, so it's not working. So now you can see it beginning to work, and it's introducing those little lines and zigzags. You see, like I say, you can do this with other materials. The paint pen is a very quick way of doing it. If you've got a fine brush, you can obviously do it with a paintbrush, but you need to work on your steady hand control. It's quite a nice feature just to lift up some of the darkness. And if I put it onto wet, you see it's just run there a little bit, but that's fine. And there you have a John Piper inspired mixed media study, and the learning here is about materials and the power of an overdrawing to pull things back together again. I hope you enjoy this one.